Yeah. Well, do you know very much? Yeah. Yes. Managing that. So you don't should be managing that.
Can you guys here, just listen to me for just a quick second before we get started? We're having internet issues in this building. If you can, we're not able to access the broadband, but if you can shut your Wi-Fi off or put it on airplane mode, so then we're able to use what we can to allow for the people that are employers. Because think. So it is nice again.
Do I need this one? Yeah. Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah.
It's working.
It's working.
I knew you'd get it.
It's that, that's nice.
Got down there.
I prefer that.
It's nice.
Yeah, we got
No, I'm not gonna do the share this.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanna- I'm just trying
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, we're gonna get started for the sake of the time to make sure that we can get through everything. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come out here on such a cold evening. My name's Vika. I'm the town administrator. I'm pretty sure every single person in this room knows who I am. This is Lisa. We'll have an opportunity for her to introduce herself, and then she's going to really lead the presentation and discussion this evening. But before I get to that, I just have a couple of things that I want to mention to give us a better understanding and idea of how the evening is going to work, and then what you should expect and look forward to in the future after this presentation. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about barging or the history behind it. Long story short, we all know that barging is a very critical part of, this community, and it's definitely an essential service that, the community and the board needs to figure out what the best operational, abilities of that are. In July, GEI was hired by the select board to do they were signed a proposal to do a feasibility study about barging and Bennetts Cove area, particularly. Lisa will go into details about the results of all of that. In November, the report was presented to us. The select board did make the decision, rather than having it be as an agenda item right away, to have GEI come out and do a presentation on their findings. And then after the presentation, have an agenda item and a discussion where a decision could be made of what the next steps are. And so this is the first time that these findings are being presented to the public. In the original proposal, it was not within the scope of work for GEI to come out and do this. So thank you to GEI for making the trip to be able to present this to the public. So during the presentation, we're gonna leave it to Lisa to kind of present the report and what is in it. Then we're gonna take a moment and allow the select board members to ask questions. And then after that, we are going to open it up to the public for questions. Whether you're a select board member or the public, we do have a full building and we are on a boat schedule. So we are going to end this meeting at 7:30. We're gonna ask that you leave it to one question per person to start out with. Until we can get through everybody who has a chance to ask their questions. It's really important and critical to keep in mind that this particular evening is really based on asking clarifying questions directly to the report that is in front of us. And not really an opportunity or the place this evening to provide historical information, feedback, comments, alternative suggestions. We're really looking at utilizing GEI and their time this evening to ask questions about what's in the report and clarifying any information that we may have about the report. And so we will let Lisa present that information. After this evening, what will happen is on February 5th, the select board will have an agenda item that is going to be specific to the alternatives that are presented this evening and what the next steps are. So the board will be discussing and making decisions on what the next steps are going to be. Short term, I would assume that long term is going to take a longer discussion into determining that. So there will be opportunity for the public, for the select board and other members to provide feedback and suggestions. We just ask that you really focus on questions this evening so that we can provide the time and the space while we have the firm representing here to be able to provide that information to us. So without taking any more time, I'm gonna welcome Lisa. We'll give her a moment to introduce herself and then she will get going.
Yeah, we'll offer the microphone, but excuse me. My name is Lisa Vickers. I'm with GEI. I am a senior coastal professional and I have a great team that I work with. We have engineers, scientists. My background is in science. I'm a regulatory specialist. I worked with the DEP for 7 years in the Land Bureau, so a lot of experience with the regulations, which you can see in the report. As Vika mentioned, we were retained by the town to look at Bennetts Cove. Given the storms that occurred last winter, there was some issues with the barge operations. And so the idea and the intent of this report was, let's look at barge landings at Bennetts Cove and see if it's feasible to continue operations there. If so, what are some conceptual designs that we could maybe add to the site that would allow for not only just the near term, but longer term use of the site for barge landings in the face of the change that you're seeing down there with the substrates, with these coastal storms that we may or may not get this winter. I'm kind of sitting on pins and needles waiting to see if we're going to have some of those storms like we did last year. And so to plan for that, and then also, in addition to just Bennetts Cove, are there sites on the island that would serve as an alternative? Either, we looked at it from just in current present day, near term, but also in a longer term perspective. So, you can go ahead to the next slide. Oh, so, just what I just said here, the objective of the report, is not to, I just want to make it clear, we're, coming in as a neutral party to all of this, learning about the barge landing and, seeing the different sites. I have experience working on should be from past, projects, more of the residential nature. So, we took a approach of wanting to meet with town officials, meet with DEP, meet with, MDOT, and kind of discuss not only Bennetts, but those alternative sites that I'll talk about in the presentation. So their objective, looking at feasibility for barge landings and exploring those alternative sites. We conducted a site visit with my colleague, Dan Bennett. He's not here tonight, unfortunately, but he is an engineer. So he looks at it from more of the engineering side of things, where I take it from more of the scientific and the regulatory side. We evaluated the existing conditions. The site visit did occur in July, so the plans had already been in place. We did not, conduct a site visit earlier to see what some of the problems that the barge operator had noted, given the problematic landings with the softer substrates out there. The second step was, when we were on the island that day, we also looked at the sites that I'll discuss. And then we went back to the drawing board and thought, in the face of the natural resources that are mapped out there, what are some options that the town has? And so we developed some high-level conceptual designs. And then looking at the regulatory requirements, as I'll discuss, this has been some valuable resources that are mapped by the state. So we need to look at the regulatory requirements because it's quite restrictive. And then looking at those alternative locations and what are the town's alternative options. Next slide. So Bennetts Cove has been used based on our research. This is a Google Earth image from 2010 that actually shows a barge landing occurring at the site in some capacity for some sort of landing. There's some documents in the report from a 1999 report that mentions a town landing, in the 1800s. So not saying that there were barge landing operations at that point, but at some point, this has been used as barge landing. Our understanding is that as development has, grown in southern Maine and should be as part of that, you're seeing an increase in barge landings and use of the site. It is the primary barge landing site, for Lino Plant, the barge operator. It provides the closest distance to Portland for municipal solid waste. And the natural resources at the site, which you may be familiar with, are sandy, gravel, mixed coarse and fine substrates. And that has had, those substrates have been impacted by the recent storm. So you're seeing the softer substrates, and that results in some more erosion at the site. So to address that, as you know, the town saw the concrete planks this past year, and they were recently removed. Next slide. So we looked at all the different map resources of the site and put it on the site plan, utilizing a survey from Owen Haskell. So those are delineating the lines in the upland. The orange is the coastal sand dunes. So this is put out by Maine Geological Survey, adopted by the Maine Department of Environmental Regulations under their Chapter 355 coastal sand dune rules. And so that's the frontal dune, the coastal sand dune system. The blue area is the Federal Emergency Management Agency's V zone, so they're the flood zone. And this was effective, these maps became effective in this year, July, and that's a V zone. When you put a frontal dune of a coastal sand dune system and a V zone together, the regulations that what's allowed are limited. So there's some challenges, as we noted in the report. The green hatched area, that's tidal waterfowl and wading bird habitat, and that's defined as a significant wildlife habitat under the Natural Resource Protection Act. The teal that's further down into the water, the subtidal area, that's the mapped seagrass or eelgrass bed that was done, I believe in 2022. Put out by DMR, DEP, Norman Doe Associates did that. That would require additional ground truthing. Some of those maps that our experience has been is, while better than what was there before, do require that you actually go out and delineate to really get an idea. Just some of the more recent aerial imagery that I've seen doesn't appear that the eelgrass is that extent, and it could extend in areas where it's not shown. So that would be something, moving forward that you'd actually want to ground truth. Next slide. So the key challenges here are erosion, sediment displacement, from the recent storms, limited accessibility, the regulatory constraints, as I've mentioned. Again, the front dune and the V zone together, basically the rules say no permanent structures in those mapped areas. And then the community concerns. I've reviewed documents that were submitted to DEP from abutters and addressing related to traffic, safety, environmental impacts due to the increase in barge landings at this location. Okay, next slide. So we kind of went back to the drawing board and thought, okay, we have these challenges before us. What are some options that the town could do? In the report, we talked about the do nothing. So, you know, the concrete planks were in place when we were out there, and there was this unknown of what's the site going to look like when you take the planks out. They've been in place, you know, for a number of months, and so the weight of those planks is compressing the sediments. Will the site be okay for the barge operator to use? It was sort of an unknown here. And then we looked at, you know, moving around some of the substrates kind of within the beach area and then the dune area so that maybe you could compact some of that area, restore some of that area and see if that would work. If you're seeing the erosion along the dune area, could you know, add in more sand and restore that dune? Temporary alternatives, so that's basically what's been done this year, putting in concrete planks. It doesn't have to be concrete planks. You could put in construction mats. You know, there's other alternatives out there than just concrete planks. And just from like a regulatory side of what temporary means, the way the DEP defines that is it's in place for less than 7 months. So that would be your option to be classified as a temporary alternative, and that's what we consider. Subsurface alternative. So because you're in a coastal sand dune system, again, in the V zone, no permanent structures, kind of thinking a little bit outside the box of if you need a more solid surface for the barge landings to occur at this site, what could we think about subsurface? So could we have a more improved base, basically with gravel, geotextile fabric, and then we would basically do a grain size analysis along the transect, and that would allow us to kind of have an understanding of what are the substrates, and then if we need to bring in outside sources of those substrates to, you know, basically look like there's nothing there. So, but it would allow the barge operator to have a more solid surface. And then another subsurface alternative that we looked at is actually putting the concrete planks below the surface and then putting those substrates on top. And then permanent alternative. We know that the current regulations will not allow that, but again, those are the current regulations, and so it's still an option just to have as, if you take away the regulatory side of things, it is an alternative. Not to say that it would be permanent, but we wanted to include that in the report because, you know, the regulations in place now don't allow for it, but in emergency, you know, they could change over time. Next slide, please. So kind of went through this already, but just to give you, here's the image of the concrete planks that were installed in 2024. Again, it's a similar system. You could do that. That is an alternative. Next slide. Here's, this is in the report, but this is just kind of, again, when we went back to the drawing board, this is a conceptual design, high level. So we kind of estimated from the tidal access perspective. This is why we show the length that we show. It's a little longer than the concrete planks currently. And again, this would allow you to have beefed up, basically stone bedding excuse me, with geotextile. And you can see on the concept profile on the bottom half here, we show the limits of the sand dune, and there's tidal wading bird and waterfowl habitat map there. And that you basically follow the existing grade that's out there now. Next slide, please. This is a little harder to see, but it has the concrete planks installed permanently below grade so that you would excavate, again, beef up the subsurface with geotextile, stone bedding, and then you'd install those concrete planks and bring in the sand surface, excuse me, to match the dune materials and the beach materials that's out there. That would, just as a side note too, with these two options, this isn't sort of set it and forget it. This is, something that's going to require the ongoing maintenance and making sure that, substrates, if they're moving around, you might need to bring in more each year, or, the way a coastal sand dune system works, it has periods of accretion and periods of erosion. Typically in the winters when you see the erosion, and then in the summer months, the sand that's kind of moved offshore kind of comes back into the system. So what we're actually seeing a bit with dune restoration projects around the state are something called beach scraping, where you actually, instead of bringing in an outside source of substrates, you can move sand around when it's accreted back into the system if necessary. So I just want to make a note that, again, do not kind of set it and forget it options. They require just ongoing maintenance and assessment of the site. Next slide. And this is the permanent alternative. So it would be as though what you had out there this summer would be set in place, obviously with a bit more design to it, where you would have, again, the subsurface with geotex and stone bedding, and then you put those concrete planks on the surface as they operated this summer. Next slide. Permitting. So there's basically the three levels. You have the federal, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Maine Department of Environmental Protection, and then the town of Cheviot Island. With the feds, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they are actually in the process, they have a general permit, a main general permit, and that's kind of broken into two categories. You have a self-verification, and then you have a pre-construction notification. The one that's currently in place this year is expiring in October, so they're revamping that. As the rules stand today, what's in place today, most of the options that are laid out here would require a permit. It depends on, what would be selected as far as what permit would be required. If it would be a self-verification, which if anyone's done their own permits, it's sort of like a permit by rule that the DP has, which is pretty straightforward, less information is required, quicker turnaround, versus the pre-construction notification, which is a bit more detailed. The Maine Department of Environmental Protection, that is, if you're doing any sort of additional fill with the beach nourishment or the dune restoration, that would require some level of permitting under the Natural Resource Protection Act, and specifically the coastal sand dune rules. There are some allowances under permit by rule for dune restoration projects, so that's a separate chapter of the Natural Resource Protection Act. Again, permit by rule is a quicker permit. And they're actually currently going through some rulemaking allowing for more activities under the dune restoration section of PDR. Temporary, DEP does not have jurisdiction. So anything in place for less than 7 months, you do not need a permit from the DEP, as was evident from the concrete planks this year. If you were to do the subsurface options, that would require a permit under the coastal sand dune rules. And then the permanent option that I noted that we've included, that would require a permit. But if you applied under that currently, that would probably not result in an approval. And then the town of Cheviot Island, based on our assessment of the ordinance under shoreline zoning and the floodplain management ordinance, the activities I listed out would require a permit of some form from the code enforcement officer. Next slide. So that was basically Bennetts Cove, and again, we kind of put those designs together, the concrete planks were in place, and there's just the unknown question of what's the season going to bring this winter and moving forward for future operations. So in the meantime, when we came out in July, we looked at alternative locations, and these locations were selected because they're publicly owned currently, and adjacent to the water, so for water access. So we looked at Stone Wharf, Sunset Landing, South Shore Drive, and the Chandler Cove Wharf. I should say that's not owned by the town. There is some support files owned by the town, but it is owned by the Maine Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. So looking at Stone Wharf, there is a barge landing there now. However, I know that there are some plans, for Stone Wharf to have some type of, redesign of some extent, so, they can consider the barge landing in the redesign potentially, but there's increased transportation costs because of the location, it's further north. So with, the Lionel plant, the barge operator, doesn't prefer this location, it's limited tidal access, and then, CMP has noted that, because there's limited, doesn't not accommodate the larger vehicles for CMP emergency access, it would be limited for them to come here and they may not be able to get to the island in the event of emergencies. So while this site does operate as a barge landing currently, it doesn't solve all the problems of, it's not an obvious solution that you can just say, let's move all the Bennetts Cove barge landing operations to the Stone Wharf, because this has another set of issues that goes along with it. Next slide, please. Sunset Landing, town-owned property, there's been multiple reports, already, done for this property, looking at a ferry landing, a barge landing operation. Again, this is something that if Bennett's Cove were to cease operations tomorrow, it doesn't offer you the opportunity to land a barge here currently. It's a significant capital, investment. And when we looked into the Malone McBroom, the Collins engineering reporting, they had laid out some of the issues in that while you have access, it would require the construction of an access road that could accommodate larger vehicles. And so there's zoning because it is residential in the upland. And then there's some issues related to the paper streets, that are laid out on the plan. So I did receive information, regarding that some of the rights may have been extinguished. So in our report, we recommend, that's something, if this were to move forward, needs to be considered, by the town. Next slide, please. South Shore Drive, we looked at that again because it was publicly owned. This was fairly ruled out fairly quickly. The erosion along the southern bank is pretty extensive. There's limited access, especially for large vehicles. You can see the rut even just from this photograph. And then to the north is a coastal barrier resource system, which is a system that is mapped by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And basically, you can't use federal funding in any type of development in a system mapped in that. It's just to the north. I mean, on the scale the maps are, it would be good to have the confirmation, but I just think there's just too many issues at this site. It just doesn't provide the landing that the town would need. I think it would just come with its own set of issues. There's no parking. Next slide. Chandler Cove Landing. We actually had a meeting with the Maine Department of Transportation officials to talk about, no design plans at hand, but to say from a planning perspective, is this an actual option? Would the state consider if the town wanted to move forward with barge landing here? Is this like flat out no, or is it something that they would be open to discussion? And they are open to discussion. However, as you may be aware, they are currently in the process of doing some improvement projects in the near term for the site. And so given that, the way it was described to us is that, the DOT, they plan projects to have a lifespan of, 15 to 20 years. So if this was something that would be in the future, it's unlikely that they're going to have that conversation at least within 10 years. We did look, in the conversation, we discussed putting in, and then or transfer bridge for the war. One of the issues that was raised with the barge landing is a lot of ledge, steep slopes, not something that is in the short-term options. And then again, similar to Sunset Landing, interest, that's something that needs for to be pursued. This aerial image also shows bird in the road, which if you have larger trucks, that could be problematic with that turn. There's parking issues that would have to be expanded upon. So again, not as an obvious location, but it is a potential for future use. Next slide, please. So the next steps, immediate is assessed. And I heard briefly that Bennetts is operating, it's the barge operator is able to land there currently. Again, we're all sort of people on the coast of Maine sitting, waiting to see how the winter fares and what the future brings us. It was clear from the doc, and then earlier this year, there was some additional letters. There's concerns related to the traffic, as I noted, the island trucks. And so I think if Bennetts Cove is selected as an area that like to maintain the barge landing operations, it would be beneficial from a community perspective to state group, get the issues on the table and what kind of they can come together, a schedule, some landings that go to Stone Wharf, some at Bennetts. These are just some suggestions, just trying to kind of think through some of the issues that we read about. It's no way trying to tell the town, what to do. So long-term planning, again, as of today, the town, there's barge landings that are able to occur, but you just don't know how long that's gonna happen for. We see it, we're seeing changes the coastal environment, sea level rise, planning perspective, it makes sense to community fuel on advancing for Bennetts Cove and for community issues that residents have. And then the ones that I censored again, all require significant capital investment. And in the report, we noted Bennetts is more of a cost-effective option, and the reason that statement was made is because when you look at Bennetts, it's still has been done out there to maintain those. So if you were to move forward, then just with the beefed up subgrade, because it's unlikely that if you added those concrete planks subsurfacely, the DEP would allow that. With the current regulations, I think the only viable regulatory option is to beef up that subgrade. And so that cost to maintain barge endings there near term. Not to say that those other options for the longer term should be off the table. I think we should discuss those, as has been with some of the reports that you saw and Colin. Laid out.
So we're gonna start out by having the select board have an opportunity one at a time to ask questions. We have this little fancy setup over here, and that we ask, because we do have, it's being live streamed, and there are some people that are watching, and we do get a pretty high rate of people that watch after the meetings. And so to ensure that they can hear it, been an issue in the past, we're just gonna ask that if you have a question to just come up by the chair over there and try to be clear in your question. And then give Lisa, one of us will answer the question. We might seek the input of the select board members as well to help with clarifying some of the answers. But should just, not to put you on the spot, but just to try to make it so it's easier for the people that are gonna listen or that are hearing to be able to follow along with the discussion. So if the select board wants to start out, if you guys have some questions that you'd like to answer, this is your opportunity. Just a reminder, please make them questions, not comments or suggestions or discussions. Because that will be, another opportunity where we'll have that, as a chance for people to provide that feedback. Now,
I have a question, so Okay, here. How's that?
Once you start speaking, I'll.
Oh, yes, so, just a basic question. So if we were to, proceed with, if we were allowed or able to proceed with the option of putting down the substrate at Bennett's Cove, what is that material and where does it come from?
That would be kind of the next step from the engineering side of things. Yeah, we'd wanna take a look, at least from the subgrade base, it would be like a gravel type of substrate with like a geotextile fiber that you'd lay down with the gravel on top, and then you probably have another layer of geotex or textile fabric, and then you would bring in matching substrates, or again, as I mentioned, depending on, you know, if you have a lot of accretion one year, you could move around some of the substrates, and that's what we're
And
considering.
that somehow doesn't mess with the, organic nature of the sand dune environment there?
No, I mean, you see a lot of like dune restoration projects that bring in outside sources of sand. So what that would take too is, again, to do a grain size analysis along a transect. And so you want to basically get that analyzed at a laboratory, and then you would get that feedback, and then you can go out to the different quarries and say, do you have this type of material, and you match it. So, you know, with the sand dune, they're dynamic. You're constantly having substrates moving around. And so this, by just beefing up the subgrade, you're kind of keeping a solid surface, but you're still allowing that sand to move around, or gravel, mixed coarse fines to move around. And again, that's not the set it and forget it option. That's, you know, could require the ongoing maintenance depending on what type of storms you get a year or something.
So essentially the maintenance is a type of raking of stuff back into position. And if it's washed away, bringing more stuff.
Right. You know, and just on a separate type of project, but, meeting with Pete Slavinsky from Maine Geological Survey, he had his colleague Nick Whiteman in one of the meetings that we had with DP. When you're bringing in outside sources of material, provided they're, you know, color, you want the color to match, but you don't want it to be like stark white or gray or something if you have more of a tan substrate. But also the coarseness or the fineness, you want to make sure that that matches. When you bring in those outside sources of material, you know, you're putting it in the system, and that's actually beneficial. I mean, it's not, sometimes it's sacrificial and it's gonna go offshore, but it's in the system and ultimately it can come back in. So it does help the, not only the beach, but the dune too.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Quick question, I think. Have you developed any estimates of the cost of the two or three, well, three alternatives, I guess, that are under consideration, or at least ranges of potential costs?
No, we did not include that as part of our proposal, so we didn't explore those options.
Will that be coming in the future?
If the town requests it, we could absolutely put some cost estimates together.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for your report, and I was impressed with how much research went into it. My question is about eelgrass and understanding the critical value of eelgrass in our environment, and knowing that some eelgrass restoration didn't go well at the Stone Wharf, and that it's apparently an issue at Sunset. How is the eelgrass doing at Bennett's Cove with that much traffic? Is the eelgrass surviving there, and why, when we're losing it in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, the loss of eelgrass in Casco Bay has been dramatic, and it's
That's right.
kind of an unknown exactly why it died back so much between, you know, in recent years. So, we have not done a subtitle investigation of what the current status is of the eelgrass. On the map that we have, that's the 2022 layer, but the aerial imagery that we use is from near Bennetts Cove, and it's really quite impressive as far as how clear it is. And so I wouldn't substitute it for a subtitle survey of eelgrass, but it does kind of show, you know, the shading. And so I can't answer the question of why. Maybe it's okay. I don't know what the current status is of it at Bennetts Cove, but I do know that it's problematic that it is dying back throughout Casco Bay.
Okay, thank you.
So I just have, if I can ask two questions, I have a question about, can you, something I don't thoroughly understand is the difference between maintenance and then sort of restoration. So when does it become an activity where you're maintaining the site versus when you need to get the approval. And, that sort of particularly, even now, even today, we've been told we can go down and do some activities in terms of beach scraping, for example, to help maintain the site. So maybe for my benefit and the rest of us, if you could sort of describe the difference and how that's determined.
Yeah, and this is, unique in the sense that it's substrates that we're moving around. Typically, when you look at maintenance, the way it's defined in the regulations is that if you're doing more than 50% of the structure, then that's actually outside of maintenance, and that would require you to go and get a permit. I think again, we don't actually have any projects that DP could provide to us that this has been done before, where if you were to beef up the substrates and then add in additional sand, exactly how, that hasn't been done before. So, I don't want to speak on behalf of DEP, but I guess if I had to, make an estimate, I would say, you had to bring in like 50% more sand to like accommodate what maybe was lost. You might want to check in with the DEP, or I would just check in with the DEP regardless of that, just to make sure that you wouldn't be outside of maintenance and repair or something that we would normally consider exempt. So.
And right now, towns have an exemption for permitting for sort of post-storm maintenance and repair. And so that covers us to some extent anyway, but I guess, so the second question I have is, do I understand correctly that under the current rules, the current law and rules, we cannot build a permanent structure that, extends above the surface at the site?
Correct. And, we actually, looking at the way the rules are written with coastal sand dunes, initially we thought, oh, could you maybe put a ramp, if that was what the town desired within the beach before you get to the map dune, but the rules are very specific, saying you cannot put a permanent structure in a frontal dune in a B zone and seaward. So you couldn't put anything in that whole entire length. So it's not just the map dune, it's also accounts for that seaward section.
On to the public, if you guys want to line up one by one, you're welcome to ask some questions. And we are doing great on time, so we might be able to elaborate a little bit more than.
Question on, section 352, title rights or interests. Just clarify, if you could clarify a little bit, first of all, what a colorable claim is, if you know. I know that was our lawyer that said it, if you could explain that. And then the paragraph below that, GEI recommends that if the town intends to move forward with a more formal barge landing alternative, is that the subsurface?
Any of those options.
Any of those options, okay. Then we need more documentation. What would the nature of that be, and what are we missing?
Right. So, yeah, the colorable claim, our time with that word, was from the town attorney. And I just, I would ask that she,
Okay, fine.
but my understanding is just like kind of used over time essentially. But as far as the title right or interest, when we met with the Department of Environmental Protection, typically if you're a homeowner and you're applying to do something like, let's say, install a dock, you would submit your deed and it would show that you have, rights to the intertidal, to the little water. This is a little unique. We have a survey from Owen Haskell. We've included the document from the 1999 report that was done. But the DEP had asked for additional evidence to show the town's right to that. So that's why we included that in the report. So what they recommended too was, showing aerial imagery like the Google Earth, or we're showing the actual barge landing there. But I think, that 1999 report has a lot of good information. I just think it needs to be collected into, demonstrate that you do have the title right, the town's title right, just put it in your title.
Thank you.
I will make a quick note too about the intertidal. I didn't mention it in the report because I don't think the intent is to go any further below into the subtitle, which is where you're seeing eelgrass. But if you were to extend to the subtitle. Again, it's not mentioned here, but that's owned by the state, and so that would be main submerged lands, and that requires its own permit, but I think it's kind of outside the context of this, but I just wanted to mention it.
So this is, related to the permanent solutions, if they're, for some, obviously there's regulatory restrictions, which you've mentioned. Which of the options that you look at, do those apply to? Of the viable options if we were wanting to do a permanent structure, and then are those restrictions appealable? And there must be other communities that have no other option. And by necessity have to employ some permanent solution. Is there an appeal process? What does that look like? Are you aware of any successfully being appealed?
Yeah, and so when you say the permanent options, do you mean just at Bennetts Cove or other locations?
Well, of the locations, because clearly Bennetts Cove meets the criteria for those restrictions, but I don't know about like Sunset Landing, for example, or over at Stone Wharf.
Yeah, so Bennetts Cove is the only site that's mapped in the coastal sand dune system, which again is less restrictive. The other sites are under the regulatory world are coastal wetlands, so that's just the Natural Resource Protection Act. There may be some tidal waterfowl, bird habitat mentioned in those sites. Eelgrass is always concerned from the regulatory perspective, ecological perspective. So none of the other sites I would say are as restrictive. I feel like you could design a project that you could work, it's with the coastal sand dune rules, it's cut and dry. No permanent structures in a V zone, frontal dune. If you're outside the coastal sand dune, there's more flexibility with the Natural Resource Protection Act. You want to avoid and minimize all your impacts to the resources. And that's first and foremost. First, avoid, and if you can't avoid to get your project purpose, then you minimize the impacts to the greatest extent. And so, looking through those other sites, you could develop something that you could place there. It's not as, again, as a coastal sand dune. And then your second question
Was about appeals, appeal
right.
process, and if there are other communities. I have to imagine there's other communities that are up against the wall
Yeah.
with their particular situation
Right.
and have needed to really argue for a permanent solution
Right.
that comes up against the regulations. Are you aware of any, and what's that process look like?
Yeah, we're working with some communities that we were doing a lot of flood modeling, vulnerability assessments. So looking at with the Maine Climate Council, addressing sea level rise and looking at it near term, mid-term, long term. But I think the January storms really opened up, to see for communities where this isn't just a long-term problem. This is going to happen more frequently here. And so communities, we have one particular down east where they have a road and it's in a coastal sand dune, frontal dune V zone, and they want to elevate it because if it floods, it cuts off emergency access for a number of residents. And so it's problematic because the rules say you can't do that because that would, if you elevate a road, you have to imagine you're going to have a side slope with riprap and that's just not allowed. So yeah, there's creative ways. I think that the DEP is it recognizes that this is an issue for municipalities. I think it would require rulemaking, going forward and making some changes legislatively. I think that's really what's going to have to happen. The dunes, there's been little changes made, just they updated the maps and that was done legislatively last year. They're allowing some changes under permit by rule to allow some more stabilization methods in the dunes, but nothing major has been done in a number of years. It's a staffing issue. It's a big process to do that, but you can make some small changes, that maybe municipal could have a little bit more allowance for this type of issue. So that's all I can offer though at this point.
So could you explain what the governor had to do to get?
Oh, sure.
So as an example, the governor found herself in the same situation.
Right, so at Steers Island, offshore wind is a big goal of the governor. And so they did a huge assessment looking at different locations and landed on Steers Island. But when they looked at the landing site, it's in a coastal sand dune system. So at the end of the last legislative session, a bill was before them to basically say that you can allow for an offshore wind facility in a coastal sand dune system. So they did change the law. And as part of that too, there is basically $1 million dune restoration fund that was just released. So communities can apply to restore their dunes. But yeah, it was not, it's basically not quite act of Congress, but locally, it does require that.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the select board for having commissioned this work. I think we all have found it very helpful. I have one question that relates to page 17 in your report, where you have been dealing with the whole issue of congestion at Bennetts Cove. And you say that the stone wharf could potentially offer barge use for property owners, while Bennett's Cove could be limited to municipal use only. What is at present, the percentage of barge use that is private? That is the congestion of Bennett's Cove. How much of that is coming from the private barging? How much is coming from municipal barging? And what kind of relief do you see that this could provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did not go to that analysis as far as breakdown of the barge landings. We just had the estimates from line of plant for last year's barge landings at Bennetts Cove. I don't know if you have any additional information as far as the breakdown goes for barge landings.
So the communications that we've had with the barge company, we have asked for the total number to really focus on the level of traffic in general that is caused into Bennett's, which I believe off the top of my memory was a little over 1,000 a year. I would have to dig a little further to try to see and ask for more clarity. I mean, we could look at our reports on the town level to see how many barges we average in a year. But that was not part of the scope of work in trying to determine the difference in this particular.
It seems to me that this is one of the essential questions, because the municipal barging is an absolutely critical municipal service. As you mentioned, if we're out of electricity, this is the only way that CMP is going to be able to get in. And if we're not able to get the refuse from the transfer station off the island, we won't be able to stay on the island very long. So it's absolutely essential that there be that regular and dependable service. And as a community, we would have a very obvious challenge from the suggestion you have here. How much would we be ready to sacrifice private barging for house construction and moving of whatever goods? So it would be very helpful, I think, to know more about.
I think these are all of the questions that the select board is now going to have to face and work their way through. And it's something that has not been in front of them to the extent that it is now. And through this process, the town has been trying to be very careful not to make any steps ahead or trying to perceive as if any choices are being made prior to having this presentation and prior to having the options be presented to the public at the same time that they're being presented to the select board. The next step would be for the board to really sit down and have a discussion, look at what the options are, determine what are the immediate short-term solutions that need to happen, that can happen, and how can the town work long-term to accommodate what the essential services are as kind of the first and most important, and then how can the board work to accommodate all of the other services that are needed. Obviously knowing that you can't just say no barging at all unless it's solid waste and electricity. So those are the really hard questions that the current board has in front of them that they're gonna have to answer in the near future and figure out how to provide the best answers for the community.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have a question, I just, when you come up, this is a little microphone, so if you can do this. My question.
Lisa, thank you, first of all, thank you for the resources that you enumerated and for making that so clear in this report. And thank you also for advocating for stakeholder committees or input. My question is, where there are maybe something missing or a discrepancy in the report, how do you want that information conveyed to you?
I guess I can send an email to Lisa. I think that would probably make the most sense. We can convey it to.
We have had people that have sent information to us already, and it's been really helpful, and Lisa has seen some of those questions. I think as things stand, you know, this part of their report and the process, you know, I don't think what's gonna happen is they're gonna go back and they're gonna adjust a lot of the report. I think what will happen is ultimately any feedback that is received and any suggestions or comments, the board will take that into the consideration in terms of what the process is, and in any future work with the firm, all those things will be taken into consideration to make sure that the information is as adequate, transparent, and honest as it can be to make the right choices.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you. And I'm not sure that this is a permanent question, because it sort of falls out of the scientific aspect of the report. But I'm wondering, in considering the alternatives, has the barge operator indicated in conversations, have you had conversations with him? I'm sure you have. Has he indicated what he sees as a solution for the barging?
I can comment to that. So I think, you know, we're all well aware that there is primarily one barge company that is in Catskill Bay. And so I think that the consideration of their opinions is important to some extent, but that can't be really a decision making in terms of what's the best for the community. As things stand, Bennetts Cove is the most ideal and protected spot for them. It's within their route, and so it makes it very easy for them to incorporate even unexpected visits as long as the ties allow it. Having said that, though, if the operations were to move anywhere else, that would be a decision of the community with the select board's recommendation. It wouldn't be a decision of a private entity. However, any farther from where it is would have an impact of the operational services that could be provided. It has been made very clear by CMP specifically, and I did have a phone conversation with them on Friday where there were a lot of concerns that were coming up about at the moment, as things stand, the current barge company has two barges that they use. One of them is larger than the other, and the smaller barge is coming out of the water for maintenance for a couple of weeks. In that time frame, if they are not able to land at Bennetts, there is no landing on Shebig because that barge cannot physically fit at the stone pier. And so these are the preparations that CMP is concerned about, because if the storm hits within those 2 weeks and they can't land at Bennetts, we're not getting serviced. And so those are the kind of the little details that we're having to work out. Inevitably, we do have to take into consideration the barge company because they're our really only option right now, but I don't want to speak for the board or the community, but that can't be kind of the decision-making factor. And so those are the things that I think the board is faced with difficult questions is if it does go anywhere else long-term, there's going to be a lot of work in doing figuring out how to still provide all of those services. Does that help?
Yeah.
Lisa, I believe you mentioned that the dual designation, the floodplain management, V zone and velocity zone label, as well as the coastal barrier sand dune, create a situation that's almost impossible to overcome to permit a full permanent structure. So given those restrictions, I know that the floodplain management designations, the static designations have been petitioned before based on further analysis. I should think that Bennettts Cove, because it's a very well protected area, no fetch, etc., very difficult to actually have a direct impact. The V zone may be questioned with further analysis. Same thing holds true. I think it was very evident in one of your slides where you showed the extent of the coastal barrier sand dune out and over the ledge on the north side, and in areas that truly are not, never were part of the sand dune that is mapped to the full extent of the cove. Is it a possibility to get further analysis on either one of those designations to then remove that obstacle?
So speaking first of the coastal sand dune, so I know that Pete Slavinsky has been out there, he measures each year the beach and just to see how it's eroded or if it's expanding. You know, we didn't directly ask that question, could you change it? But he didn't go out there and say, this isn't a dune. You know, if you go down to Pine Point in Scarborough, it's all parking lot, but if you look at the coastal sand dune map, it's in the back dune of coastal sand dune. So it's a little bit, you know, you do look at these areas sometime and think, how is this a coastal sand dune? I've seen like a riprap shore that's, you know, it's in a coastal sand dune, a map, right? And these maps,
Clearly ledge.
yeah, and there's some placement of riprap along the one section there. So, you know, it is a question that you could formally present to, Maine Geological Survey and say, you know, we'd like a formal, like, review of this as one. I think that might be, I don't know, it's worth asking.
Is it possible?
It's possible, and it is, and then,
So I will say we did do that one.
oh, you did, okay.
And I think the thing you have to think about with sand dunes is they're dynamic. And so there's a reluctance, because it's quite cobbly to the west of the entrance, you know, the road entrance, when it used to be quite sandy. And so that's changed a lot just in my lifetime. But I think, you know, sand isn't the only criteria that, you know, qualifies it as a map sand dune. And there are even 4, you know, in fact, some of the dune restoration uses sort of rock cores or lava cores. So I think we directly asked them that question when they were there. And although the fringes of the sand dune designation might change, it would not change in the area that the barging is occurring. And there is clearly sand dune activity, you know, presence there and movement. And so, you know, I don't think it changes the permit requirements in the area that we need to access.
Just to speak on the FEMA mapping, I mean, again, those are just in effect, but, you know, owners up and down the coast do reach out and they do letter of map revision, letter of map change, letter of map amendment. I work with a woman, Legal Pike, who does quite a few of those, you know, working in, yeah, so I mean, if that's something the town would pursue, it would be, you know, certainly something you could have a conversation with legal about and seeing like, would that even be likely for that section? I mean, until you do the model, you wouldn't know, but she could at least provide guidance.
Would removing that constraint or
Yeah,
petitioning for a change, if successful, make a permanent solution more viable?
The removal of the V zone maybe gives you a little bit more flexibility as far as the coastal standing. I mean, you're still not gonna be able to put a boat ramp in, but I'd like, you know, I always have to go back to the rules and check off the boxes, but it does remove a little bit of the really restrictive regulations. Because it's cut and dry right there, like I said, no permanent structures, so, yeah.
Okay. How do you use this?
I push the button on it, like the church.
Can you hear me?
Hold it up to you.
I'll just speak up.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming out here on this
blustery
Oh,
night.
I think you
Not
just,
just turned it off, so turn it back on.
oh,
Yeah.
just hold it. and then-
Hello?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So, I have more than two questions, maybe three or four. They're not questions, all of them that you can just answer right now. But I'd like to read them so everyone knows what they are and just leave them here. There are a couple that you can just answer.
Okay.
So I'm gonna read them, okay?
Okay.
Read my glasses. Is your conclusion that 332 is not allowed under existing DEP regulations? Is the stone bedding and geotextile solution proposed in 331 considered a structure under DEP, chapter 355, and if not, why not? In your opinion, is Bennettts Cove the most sensitive from a natural resource perspective of any of the alternatives you considered? When you state that the stone wharf cannot accommodate larger vehicles, page 17, what size vehicles do you believe are too large to use at Stone Wharf? And what is the primary limiting factor on larger vehicles using Stone Wharf? Last one. Were you provided the photographs that accompanied the correspondence from Beryl, also known as Beryl Dana, and were in a separate file due to their large size, but they did come with a letter? Were you provided photographs of barging into Bennettts Cove or the multiple trucks parked there for hours sometimes, some of them 6 at a time? Waiting in line for the barges while blocking private driveways or aerials of the location of CMP cable. You can actually see it, since that was a question here. Or any other photographs. We'd be happy to provide these and any others to you if you don't have those. Thank you.
So just the earlier questions were related to the options that we presented as subsurface. So the subsurface permanent ramp and concrete planks, it's, again, there's not a project that we have precedence that we can go back to that says, oh, in, Scarborough, they did the similar project that the DEP approved. With our meeting with DEP, we presented these options and there's some guidance. But I think looking at the sections of the rules that are pertaining to permanent structure, I think that they could probably say that's not going to be allowed for this, even subsurfacely. With the sand gravel, is that a permanent structure? And that's again a question that this hasn't been answered before by the DEP, but their guidance was this is the most likely option that the town has to maintain the barge landing with the current regulations. So it's something that, when you move through the application process, it's really, you're only gonna know. You'll have direction from the DEP, but, they have to sit there, send it to IFNW, DMR, MGS, look at their standards and kind of make the decision. I do know that they have reached out to the Attorney General's office to kind of get some guidance as if the subsurface would be considered a structure. So we're, that would be, wait to hear back on the feedback, but it wasn't a, you shouldn't apply kind of options. This is your most likely. And then as far as some of the reports, I have to get back to you. I know I have the report saved on my computer. There was a number from Beryl Dana from 2017 and then most recently, that I have to look at those photographs. You have a year in mind.
It was 2023 from Julia Brown.
Yeah. Again, I have a number of those letters, so I'd have to go back and look to see it.
It's quite a large file of photographs that came with a letter.
Mhm.
And also we provide the photographs.
Again, kind of going off of what,
I think you have.
yeah, I have a number.
What we did is, we did, because I think one of the neighbors requested that information be sent to them, and so for full transparency to make sure that they were receiving all the information. Not only did we provide the information that we had, but then the information you had forwarded went directly to them, so.
So we did write you for information, all along the way. And with that, specific letter, when we requested these, there were no photographs with it. That's why I.
Okay, so I think that's more down the line of the discussion that we don't want to have tonight. I think that's more of, if you want to reach out to me, we can talk about it.
Well, it was information we provided you.
But we're really focusing on questions, and so we can't really directly answer that. We answer to the best of our abilities, but I don't want to get into a conversation about it right
It
now.
wasn't a comment and it wasn't, it was publication. Information.
We believe she has it, but we can't certainly 100% answer it, and that's the most honest answer I can provide you right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks for your report. Eelgrass, I'm curious, there was a number of references to eelgrass in the alternate sites, and I'm just wondering why there wasn't, or do you have additional information that just didn't make it in the report about eelgrass at Bennetts? There's been references in some of the letters that have been cited about the eelgrass population there, so I'm just curious why that was omitted.
It was noted that it was there, and it's also shown on the map as well.
Okay, I just saw that there were more references for the alternate sites such as Stone Wharf and so on.
Like the percentage,
The Sunset,
you mean?
yeah, I was curious as to why there wasn't more,
Just the percentage, you mean?
more.
Yeah,
detail.
that was probably just an oversight as far as why we didn't include the percentage that was mapped on those from the main Office of GIS, so
Fair enough.
apologies for that.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. So if there's no other questions, we do have a few more minutes. If there's no other questions, we'll wrap this up, and then the select board will be having an agenda item on February 5th. That will be a kind of follow up from this, where they will be discussing the alternative options that were presented, and going into the direction of trying to decide what the next steps are. So if there's, I don't know if any of the select board members have a comment or any suggestions that they want to make before we wrap up about what the next steps are, so that people are aware.
I just wanted to kind of emphasize,
Carol.
at
So we're not being heard right now.
I just wanted to emphasize even at the next select board meeting, the goal, so we gave GEI a pretty discrete task. You know, what are the options at Bennetts Cove that could be permitted, that could, you know, support barging operations at that site? And and part of that, even for the DEP, which we didn't really mention, but it's sort of implied, the DEP does require an analysis of what the other options are as part of any permit application. So for us, the next step will be to decide if any of those options are something we want to pursue, or if there's some other option that we want to pursue. But it's really going to be related to the next step in terms of potentially trying to permit a site or not permit a site or look at another site. But it won't be a discussion about environmental impacts, truck traffic, because that's not the objective of that particular meeting. There will be an opportunity as we move forward to discuss those things. I just wanted to make it clear that it's really the mechanics of what's possible to improve the site for barging operations. So I just want people to be prepared that that would be the focus of the discussion, would be the decision the board might be making about our next steps, which really relate to, do we select one of these alternatives or not? And that's You know, so that's a little bit narrower than what some of even the concerns I heard tonight. And it's not that we don't want to hear those concerns. It's just not at that meeting. I do think that, you know, at that meeting, we may discuss how we want to pursue some of the stakeholder engagement in a more formal way than we have done so far. So that, you know, and it's not that we don't want to hear from you. We want it to be, you know, productive and scheduled.
I have one other question that's probably gonna be difficult to answer, but I won't ask it anyway. And that is the availability of funding, federal funding, state funding, what have you, for whatever direction we're taking. If you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
I think I can speak loud enough, is that okay? Getting it out? Okay. There is I can provide Vika with a whole list of grant and funding opportunities through the state. Some may not be applicable, but at least it's a pretty cohesive list that, the Main Sea grants put together. So, there's some infrastructure grants in there, that we can look at, or, yeah, it's a little tricky, but I could look at the list and make some recommendations as, you know, pursue these potentially. Mhm.
Hi, thank you, Lisa. So I'm just curious, we had some, or Vika and I shared a conversation about questions and maybe some concerns. And I understood that tonight's format wasn't for that, which I completely understand. And I think this was fantastic. And I understood that February 5th was going to be our date for that. And now Carol, you stand up and say, actually, that's not what February 5th's format is for. That will be for another time. So
I didn't want to say it's, I'm not sure what you're saying it's for, but what the board objective is, will be to be making a decision on the next steps. And so comments relevant to that, we're very happy to hear.
But
But
questions, concerns, like.
no, I think
when
we
does that
can
happen?
provide those, but at the same time, we will have to limit the length of that discussions. I mean, as we always have, to probably 3 minutes per person in that realm. Just as we have in prior meetings, and we have had other meetings where we've had a variety of comments. I'm just explaining that the board's decision is gonna be restricted to what our next steps are. Not solving truck traffic or any other things at that meeting.
But listening to people's concerns about environmental issues related to that or related to erosion or.
Yep.
So you want to listen, you want to hear that then?
We're fine hearing that, but we will probably have, it depending on the other items on the agenda, we will probably have to limit, as we typically do, you know, people's comments to probably about 3 minutes is what we typically do.
I think, you know, I think the important takeaway is that the town is in a very difficult position now where a decision needs to be made. What's gonna happen now while a long-term solution is made? And I think that there are a lot of concerns from people about the issues and some of the things that we discussed and the comments that the select board received and suggestions and concerns through email. At this point, I think what I've experienced is I'm receiving the same type of questions from a variety of different people, and it's not it's just, we can't fulfill all of those requests, and it's our job to represent the taxpayers and the public, but we can't provide that answer and those comments and listen to every single thing to that extent, because if I did that, that's all I would do. And then we wouldn't get any of this done. And so they're not going to be heard. They're not going to be listened to or responded to. It's there. You might not get the answer or solution to the manner that you're wanting to, maybe in the time frame that you're wanting to, because the biggest priority right now is what is the barging option right now and what are those steps? And the balancing act of the board making those really hard decisions while also listening to the public input. It's a difficult thing, but I think, the important thing really to remember is all of the taxpayers, you all voted in this body. And so there needs to be some level of trust to the people that you voted in to make some of those hard choices. And that's a hard task to do. But that's not to say, by all means, send those comments, those questions. We'll answer them to the best of our abilities. And it doesn't mean they're being ignored or avoided by any means.
And that just seemed counter, what Carol just said seemed counter.
And the conversation that I had with you, yes, it took a few minutes of my time, but I hope it was valuable to you and far quicker and more productive than what we could do sitting in a board meeting with a lot of back and forth where no decisions are being made.
So maybe a different kind of format for us to handle, not us, for the board to handle this situation might be something for the board to consider.
So I
Just a
think,
thought.
I think one of the recommendations in the report, which I support, is a stakeholder group to work through those concerns. And I think that's usually a more productive way to do it. That isn't really the board's role in a board meeting to kind of work through things. So I think that's what, and I maybe didn't express it clearly, but that's what I was trying to express is that I understand there are a lot of concerns. I share some of those concerns. I think the format and the time to work through those concerns, we can hear them, but it won't be the February 5th board meeting. It will be a different format and it's going to require a commitment on the town's part and also the community's part in order to be successful. And, this is not to minimize this, but this is one of many coastal infrastructure projects that we are simultaneously dealing with.
Right,
So try to, understand, but I think we are very well aware of the people's, some people's concerns. Hearing them is good for us. We want to hear them. I just don't want you to be, I just wanted to kind of make the expectations clear that what our primary focus is going to be not addressing those concerns at that time, it's making a decision. And that doesn't mean that your concerns will not be addressed. I think that's where I'm coming from.
And I guess the one that there's, obviously there are a lot of people here who are directly within the vicinity of Bennettts Cove. And several months ago, the select board made a decision to have 2 representatives who would meet with that group on the side to be able to collect some of these concerns, to collect some of this feedback, and then bring it back to the board. And so I think I would, if you as a group in the neighborhood, a lot of you have provided me feedback and it's similar feedback. And so what I would really encourage you is really maybe getting back together with those 2 board members and siphoning some of those. So then we can have a better way of really hearing those concerns and working through them rather than having each board member or the town administrator receiving several different communications where it's a huge topic, but it's one of half a dozen to a dozen, and the balancing act is extremely difficult, and it could perceive as though we're trying to ignore people's comments, which is not at all the intention. It's how can we better work together and function together so then everyone's heard and those questions are answered, but then the board can make decisions, because at this point, they need to make some decisions into the next steps. So,
But just seems though that decisions are gonna be made without really input from, we can ask questions, but.
I think you can provide input on that is relevant to the decision-making as best you can. I'm not saying we're not gonna listen to you, but you know, I think, I don't know how else to say it. I think that the meeting will be for the board to deliberate about this particular decision on the next step. This is a long journey that we are all on, and it's gonna take, you know, some time to work through all the pieces. And there, you know, we have another neighborhood group we're working with on another coastal erosion issue, and it's the same thing. I guess I'm asking you to be patient with the board as we try to accommodate all of these projects. And I think that meeting with the two select board representatives and maybe trying to consolidate your concerns so that you can present them to the board effectively would be a good idea, as Vika suggested.
And I mean, I'm happy to carve out some time and sit down with a group of people to, you know, to consolidate some of that. We're open to those suggestions. It's that, you know, when there's a lot of the same questions being repetitive, then it makes it difficult to really provide the answers to everybody at the same time. But I think a lot of the feedback too is repetitive in some ways. And so it could be perceived that it's being ignored, but it's not, because it's already being considered in many matters.
Thank you.
We've got about 5 minutes and then we're shutting it down, so she can go home.
Thank you again. I don't, my question is, when you talk about a permanent solution and you're talking about planks or something underneath the sand, is that permanent or not? And if it's permanent, why is that an option when permanent is not allowed?
Yeah, so as we looked at the site, looking at the regulations, you know, permanent, it's a permanent structure, but when we consider that, it's typically a house or a dock or a deck or something like that. So in the way of, you know, this hasn't been done before, if we put something subsurfacely where you're gonna still maintain the movement of sand and water and wind, which is the, you know, protecting the dune and allowing that to move, would the DEP kind of subsurfacely allow something like that? You know, so that's why we put it on the table. I guess I would consider it a creative solution to this problem. But, you know, it is, you know, okay, it is something that would allow that, you know, the environment and the concerns that why it's mapped as a dune to still be maintained as a dune versus just kind of shutting off the sand movement if you put concrete planks right on the surface.
Okay, and there's no precedent for another community on the coast having done that?
Subsurface?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no, unfortunately not.
And quick last one. When we're talking about, you look at dune restoration that's happening up and down the coast. And would that help our dune if we, in some area, did dune restoration? Would that help stabilize the area further?
I mean, you'd have to look at, you know, ultimately what the design is that you would land on. And we kind of talked a little bit about this with DEP of, you know, if we put in some subsurface area, you know, could you restore portions of the dune maybe where there's like riprap that had been placed? I think that's private property though, so
Yeah.
it might not be, but you know, we were just kind of having an open discussion of wouldn't that be more beneficial, you know, versus we're not really, you know, we're still allowing that movement of sand, wind, water. And then you know, you get this dune restoration area, which you got the riprap, put in what, you know, sand and plantings, but you know, it's an option. I don't know how it's gonna, you know, it's hard to say without having the.
You can't answer that
It's not-
question.
Yeah, I try.
Good. That was very helpful.
No,
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.
Oh, thank you.